Hello everybody. Welcome to the English Department Applicants event here at Reigate College. It's so nice to see so many of you attending the event. We've got 127 at the minute. It's still rising. So yeah, this is the like I say, this is the Applicants event for English. I'm Richard Vardy. I'm the head of English, head of the department. And we have 4 other panelists. If I could ask them to turn their videos on, and you should all be able to see them now. Thank you. And over to them. They're just going to introduce themselves as well.
Hi, I'm Evie. I've always been a bit of a book nerd, so choosing English was quite easy for me. I decided to go for the English literature course over the Lit and Lang course. Because when I was applying to the college, I was looking at the syllabus online and the suggested reading materials and that sort of thing. And I made my decision that way because particularly with poetry, it was something that I really enjoyed at GCSE and wanted to make sure it was something that I studied at A-level, which we do. We do John Donne poetry and the modern poetry anthology. When I leave college, I'm hoping to study a joint degree of history and English literature. And from studying these 2 subjects together at the moment, I found it really useful for understanding the historical context in which pieces were written. So, for example, at the moment, I'm currently looking at Elizabeth I's reign in history, and it's really great for a wider knowledge of the period in which Shakespeare and John Donne were writing. And for the coursework as well, all the English literature students look at Oscar Wilde's A Picture of Dorian Gray. And I chose to compare it to Charlotte Bronte's Jane Eyre, because it gave me a really great opportunity to look at themes that I really wanted to personally look at and pick apart these novels myself. Overall, I'd say that English literature has given me new skills in formulating my own ideas and being able to discuss topics such as feminism, politics, and understanding different societies, both from the past and looking towards a possible future with the dystopian fiction from The Handmaid's Tale. And really, it's just given me a greater fluency and more mature writing style that is so useful for so many different areas. So top tips for English literature students: keep reading, read around the subject. Critics as well. It's not something that we do so much at GCSE, but it's really important for A-level. So yeah, that's my advice.
Thank you, Evie. So we'll continue with the student perspective then for the rest of you, from your views and your perspective on English. So Ethan, over to you.
Hi guys, I'm Ethan, and I'm actually a language and literature student. And I think for me, what made me decide, because I was very kind of split when I was deciding, I didn't really know which course to choose. So I really kind of looked at all of my courses, and what I enjoy, and I really went for that. And back at GCSE level, I did actually quite enjoy English. So I thought, you know, it was a no-brainer. And on the course, it is actually quite, I'd say it is actually quite different to the GCSE level, because you're actually doing a lot of variety of different texts. Like you study the Voices anthology, and that's really focusing on different genres. And by genres, you don't mean horror and fantasy. You mean how it's written, so whether it's a diary entry or an article. So there's a lot of variety in that. And obviously towards the end of the course, so year 2 now, we're doing creative writing, and that's something I was really passionate about. So it was kind of like the common theme between all of my different courses, kind of creative, because when I go on to uni, I'm hoping to do film production. And so with the course I'm doing now, that's English film production, or English Langlit, sorry, film production and acting. I thought the kind of common theme with it all was creative storytelling. So yeah, I thought that was a key factor. And actually that theme, that common theme between all of the subjects actually really helped me. I learned things from different areas of different subjects which helped me with others. So I thought that was really good. And I would say I'd say my like top tips for starting out is really just engage with the subjects, and really just ask questions from your peers, from the teachers, because they're all really there to really, because they're really passionate about English, and that is a distinct factor between A-level and GCSE. So yeah.
Thank you, Ethan.
My name's Alicia, and I do the English Language and Literature course, as well as Media and Music A-level. And I do find my all three of my A-levels do link quite nicely together, especially Media and English, because they both use quite analytical thinking and reading, which is something I've loved about the course and didn't really know coming into A-levels. So yeah, I've really enjoyed that, and they work really well together. But yeah, coming into Reigate College, I knew that I wanted to do English because I've always loved reading and writing. So when I found that the English Language and Literature course does creative writing, I was completely sold on it. And poetry is something I'm not quite as confident with. So yeah, this course suited me much better. So the creative writing is basically your coursework for the 2 years. So it's 20% of your grade. And what we had to do is we wrote 2 creative pieces. One was a fiction piece, and one was a non-fiction piece. And we had to incorporate an overall theme into those pieces. So our theme was the theme of home. So you are writing to a brief, but it's quite flexible. So for instance, for my non-fiction piece, I wrote about my grandma and how my perspective of my grandma changed as I grew older. And in my piece, I just described my grandma's home. So that's how I incorporated the theme of home into my writing. So it is quite flexible, and you have a lot of creative input, which I really liked, because I'm also definitely much more of a creative person, not so much mathsy and sciencey. I'm not very good at that. But yeah, I'd say if you want to do the Langlit course, the biggest thing you could probably do to help yourself in September is to just go over grammar. We do a lot of language analysis, so like looking into specific words and the grammar. So going over the sort of things you'd learn in primary school, like your nouns and verbs and adjectives and adverbs, and your literary terms like similes and metaphors. And probably the easiest way to do that is to go on Quizlet and just type in English terminology. It's what I do now to revise. And yeah, that's probably the best way and would really help you when you come and do the course in September.
Great, thank you. Some top tips there. And finally, moving on to Amy.
Hi, my name's Amy. I study the English Literature and Language course. I also do Media A-level and a BTEC in Law. And like Ethan, I was really kind of torn between literature and language up until kind of the first day. It was very much, I didn't know which one I wanted to do. And kind of what I did to help myself in that is over the summer holidays, I went to my local library and I got all the books out for both course, and I read through all of them. And it did take me quite a while because I was reading 2 courses worth of books. But then I kind of read that and thought, oh, I don't really like the literature books as much as I quite liked Gatsby and Othello and like the play we study, which is translations. And I'm probably offending Evie, I'm sorry, literature. Frankenstein was not the one for me. But I really liked Gatsby, and I kind of researched more into that and kind of the context around it, which is something we do focus on as well. Not only kind of the historical context, but the context of the author and how this kind of influenced his meaning. And a big factor for me as well was the coursework. So like Ali said, the creative writing was kind of the thing that also really drew me to the course. And when we started it last year, it was actually kind of the decider to what I wanted to do at uni, which is English and creative writing. So I think starting my coursework and starting to write again, because I've always been writing throughout my whole life. You know, as a child, I'd fold a piece of paper up and make my own little story. And I think kind of I rediscovered that when writing like A-level coursework. And I kind of based mine on home, like Ali said, like the brief we had. And I kind of also based it on Ireland in 19th century. So we read texts that we had to kind of base it on, pardon me. And we kind of, yeah, it was really interesting to look at and kind of look at language and analyse how we as like a author would kind of construct meaning and how we would want to portray it to our own audience.
Okay. Thank you very much. I'm sure you found those perspectives very useful in helping you to have a greater understanding of what studying English is like, and all the different sort of pathways and journeys and decisions and top tips that you just heard there. So that's in many ways achieved most of the purposes of today's event already. So I was thinking about this event, and one of the most common questions that we get asked is what is the difference between English literature and English language and literature? So that's the main purpose behind this. You're just clarifying the differences between the two, and the similarities, of course. And there were lots of enormous amounts of crossover as well. Once I've done that, and we've already seen much of that as well from the students' perspectives, I'm just going to spend some time modelling the sort of approaches we take in an English literature lesson, and then moving on to an English language and literature lesson, and then at the end there'll be an opportunity for you to ask questions on the question and answer facility on Zoom, and I'll answer those questions, which will be collated by a colleague, and I'll be answering those at the end. And so I'll try and pass as many questions over to the students, so you get the students' perspective as much as possible as well. Just a few things about this webinar anyway. So in case you're worried, it's all sort of anonymous, as it were. I can't see any of your faces or anything like that. It's at 4 points throughout this event, you'll be asked to take part in a poll, which will be fairly obvious when it comes up. It will pop up, and you'll be able to answer the questions on that. Again, those answers will be anonymized, so there's no worry about getting it wrong, as it were. Yes, and the lessons on the John Keats sonnet and on the Charlie Brooker article link to the task which was sent to you, which was emailed to you a few weeks ago. If you have done that, that's great. If you've been able to read through the Charlie Brooker article and the Keats sonnet. If you haven't, it's not a problem. We're going to go over the tasks and think about those texts throughout the next 45 minutes or so. But if you have done that, that's really good, and I'm hoping you'll be able to see and have a sense of the sort of things that we'll cover in the lesson. But if you haven't done it, it's really not a problem. So just a little bit about the English department. It's a very large department, one of the largest in the college. It's a very successful department. It's a very experienced department as well. In normal times, pre and post-COVID, we run and will run a range of trips, especially to the theatre. As soon as they come up, we try and grab the tickets for any production and performance of anything that relates to the text that we're studying. We went to the National Theatre 18 months ago to see translations. And there's also a performance of Frankenstein, an adaptation of Frankenstein, the National Youth Theatre as well. We have visits and talks from lecturers. Just about a year ago, we had some lecturers from Sussex University come and talk about university, what a degree is like, what an English degree is like, but also to provide some lectures on different topics and aspects of Shakespeare in that particular instance. We have a range, we offer plus classes for students which have a range of functions. It's often helping students who might feel they're falling behind a bit, or they want particular help with a particular aspect of the course, and also to help achieve obviously a higher grade. We have a number of enrichments which are related to the department. We have a creative writing club and a reading group as well. So you will have seen, or you may have seen, the videos, the promotional videos, which are on the website, and also further details of the different aspects of assessment and the topics and units of the different courses. So they're all out there, they're all on the website, and for you to see and at your own time. So I'm not going to spend this time going through in minute detail about the different sort of structures of the different exams or anything like that. So I thought it would be useful just to kind of clarify the similarities, and there are many, as I said earlier, and the differences between the two courses. And as you will probably have worked out from this slide here, that the bits in red are the differences. So on the English literature course, as we heard from Evie, I mean, it's a good a summary as you'll get of English literature course. I mean, she covered everything, but we focus on, obviously, on literature, however that is defined, and it's similar in that sense to GCSE English literature. You know, we read, we discuss plays, including Shakespeare, poetry, novels, and so on. So on the English language and literature course, there is, of course, a study of literature on that course as well. So there's 2 plays, as Othello and translations. You'll study novels, but as we heard earlier, no poetry on the course at the minute. So so that's a key difference. So you know, if you really like poetry, then English literature, there's a lots of it on English literature. If you hate it with a passion, then English language and literature might be something to consider. Another key distinguishing feature of English language and literature is the study of non-fiction. And again, we heard, I think, from Ethan, the kind of the Voices anthology being mentioned in that. So it's non-fiction, so looking at written text, looking at spoken text. We're going to look at one of the texts we're looking at today is from that very anthology. So it's a range of non-fiction, kind of literary in some cases, but non-literary, if however that is defined. So I think that's speeches, reviews, blogs, and so on. So that's the kind of the main sort of area of difference, I would suggest. So no poetry and the study of non-fiction on the language and literature course. The method of assessment is the same. Again, we heard that 20% coursework, 80% exam. All of the assessment for English literature is essay-based. So you're you know, in the exam you're writing 5 essays across 3 exams. And then you also write an essay for your coursework as well. So that is largely the same for English language and literature, except, as we've already heard, the coursework is creative writing. So that's the kind of, again, an important difference there. The creative writing aspect of a coursework isn't all of the 20%, because part of the coursework, you're also writing an essay. You'd also write an essay on your own responses, so you're kind of analysing and explaining why you wrote the pieces in the way that you did. The skills, the assessment objectives, as it were, which were covered across courses, are very similar as well. We can see the bits in black here are the same. The key difference, of course, is as we heard from Evie, the alternative readings, the critics, which we look at in detail, certainly with 12th night and for the coursework in particular. And a key difference, and again, we heard from Alicia with the learning some terms, again, making sure you know the kind of nouns and the verbs and all of that. So that's what we might call the language framework. So English language and literature goes deep into the linguistic structures of a text, which happens a little bit, but not so much on the English literature course. So in sort of just under 5 minutes, that's a summary of the difference between the two courses. So we will start then with the John Keats sonnet. And again, as I said earlier, that sonnet is, you will have received that, and you may have had a chance to have a look at it and think about the three tasks, the three accompanying tasks for that. So that's it. That's what John Keats looks like as well, in case you're wondering. And here is the sonnet. So I'm going to read it out. But there's a few words and references which might be unfamiliar to you, which I've sort of summarised on the right-hand side there. So do make sure if there's anything you're not sure about, so that it may well be explained on the right-hand side. And it is a sonnet. I'll explain what that means, the fact that it's a sonnet in a moment, and it's written in 1817, so 200 years ago. It keeps eternal whisperings around desolate shores, and with its mighty swell gluts twice 10,000 caverns, till the spell of Hecate leaves them their old shadowy sound. Often 'tis in such gentle temper found, that scarcely will the very smallest shell be moved for days from where it sometime fell, when last the winds of heaven were unbound. O ye, who have your eyeballs vexed and tired, feast them upon the wideness of the sea. O ye, whose ears are dinned with uproar rude, or fed too much with cloying melody, sit ye near some old cavern's mouth and brood, until ye start as if the sea nymphs quired. Okay, so the first task, which was on the sheet, which you may have received, we've turned it into a poll, and the question is, what does Keats particularly admire about the sea? You can only answer one. You can only answer once. There's only one answer, but there's more than one correct answer, as it were. But there are also some answers which you'd struggle to argue as being wrong. Yes, thanks. And so here we are. I'll give you sort of a minute or so to have a read through these answers, and then make your decision as to which of these summaries of a poem you feel matches your own reading and your own experience. Like I say, there's more than one correct answer, but you can only vote once, so it's the one you feel the most. It's fascinating seeing the bars move. The second one seems to be winning at the minute. So another 20 seconds, we'll say. Okay. Brilliant. Okay, so oh God, going back. Yes, share the results. I don't know. Is that you doing that? Yeah. Yeah, brilliant. Okay, so this is fascinating, isn't it? We've got the second one seems to have won. We don't normally do this in an English literature lesson, by the way. So this is a way to sort of establish some sense of interaction with the 160 of you who are out there. At this stage, we would read the poem. We would discuss as a class. We would start with meanings and start with attitudes and think about what the writer's trying to express and trying to suggest. Now, there are, of course, wrong answers. The first one, you'd struggle to find any evidence that that the sea is where John Keats fell in love for the first time. You could say, well, anyway. And then they struggle to find evidence that Keats enjoys surfing, so or anything like that. So there are wrong answers, but there are a number of right ones. It's interesting that to the majority of you, the winning answer here is he admires the sublime scale and force of the sea. And that is certainly in the poem, isn't it? It's certainly there in those first sort of 4 or 5 lines. But it's interesting, that's what many of you have taken away. But also following that, he also admires the calm, small gentleness of the sea as well. And some of you picked up on that, and then and are identifying the way in which he admires the way in which the sea changes. So the fact that it's both this huge force which shapes the land and gluts these caves and so on, and as well as being calm and gentle at other times. So you know, the fourth response here sort of suggests, you know, that there's more than one way of more than one thing he admires about the sea. Another answer which came through with a lot of 42 out of 136 respondents, the sea provides solace and an escape from the pressures and challenges of living in this world. And we'll do a little bit more thinking about that on the next couple of slides, I think, but that's an interesting idea as well. So the sublime scale and force of the first 4 lines, the calm gentleness of the following 4 lines, and then the solace and escape and a wellspring for the imagination being what's picked up on the final 6 lines of the poem. Okay. God, just cross that out. Okay. Excellent. So that's how we start. We start with thinking about the what the poem means and what we take away from it as readers. In case you're wondering, John Keats was he wrote this poem actually sitting next to the sea, apparently in the Isle of Wight. That's Shanklin Beach at the bottom there, and he talks about apparently this is one of the romantics like to create myths and legends about themselves and tell stories about themselves. He was sitting in this kind of Shanklin Chine, it's called. And he was sitting in that kind of cleft in the rock and looking out across the sea, and so he says, inspired to write this poem. Another key context for this poem is it was written during the Romantic period of art and literature, which was at the beginning of the 19th century. And I'm going to pass over now to Evie, who has studied this period in literature and is going to summarize it for us.
Yeah, so we look at Romanticism within the context of Mary Shelley's brilliant novel Frankenstein, which uses a lot of romantic features such as the power of nature, with sort of the harsh and desolate landscapes of the mountains of Switzerland and the voyage to the Arctic. And a key theme we consider is the conflict of nature versus science and the classical sort of romantic pushback against industrialization, and it contrasts with the Gothic themes of science and supernatural, which Mary Shelley adds into her novel. And it's full of emotion and drama, and a lot of isolation and solitude as well, which is a real key theme of the Romantic period as well.
Thank you, Evie. I just picked up on one thing that Evie said. It was a lovely expression, a romantic pushback against industrialization. And so when we're thinking about the next question, here there's another summary there, but Evie's was better. When we got this question, which was one of the questions, the third question on the task which you were emailed, what is Keats instructing the reader to do at the end of a poem? But then we can say, and why? Now, at the end of this poem, the final 6 lines, he's instructing the reader, us, to go and sit like he did on a beach or in a cave looking out across the sea and feast upon the view that we see, just like this romantic wanderer of a Caspar Friedrich painting at the top there. But it's not the sea, he's looking at mountains, but same point remains. Looking out across a natural landscape and feast upon them until you start as if the sea nymphs quired. So this idea of this kind of wellspring of imagination, so you sat there looking out across this broad horizon, have the wideness of the sea, and then you have this sort of romantic sort of epiphany. The imaginative impulse kicks in, and you can imagine synonyms singing. You can imagine these things. And not only that, that helps then as a kind of, to use Eva's phrase, pushback against industrialization. So we may pick up on the line here, whose ears are dinned with uproar rude. So this idea that our eyes and ears are tired out from the kind of stresses and strains and anxieties of the modern world and modern living, and indeed industrial sort of noises and sounds and city. And that instead we sit on a beach and look out, and it makes us feel better. It's very modern, is it? Well, the kind of well-being and sort of, you know, and you see it a lot with, obviously in lockdown with people realizing they can go out for walks and sort of have the same sort of experiences. And so in order to understand what Keats is saying in these final 6 lines, in order to fully understand it, we need to have an appreciation and awareness of context, and especially these romantic contexts, which shed a really interesting light on why he's saying it. So we look at context in detail. Another thing, and then when we consider the ideas of the poem, we think about, we locate the text, I should say, we locate the text in its context and thinking about what it might be: biographical context, cultural context, social, economic context, and so on. And also how the texts are read differently across time as well. And then we turn our attention to language and form. So for this poem, we can't help but notice that it's a sonnet. And a sonnet is a very particular type of poem. It's a 14-line poem, and most sonnets, Shakespeare was an exception to this, and so some of you may have some familiarity with the Shakespearean sonnet. But this sonnet follows the Petrarchan or Italian sonnet model, where basically it's a poem divided into 2. We have the octave, the first 8 lines, and then the sestet, the final 6 lines. The octave normally follows the ABB rhyme scheme, and the sestet, different poets play around with different rhyme schemes. What Keats has done, interestingly here, is really separate out that rhyme, tired and then quired. We've almost forgotten about that rhyme by the time we get to it at the end there. So we consider this a form, and you heard me say earlier about the kind of first 4 lines are about sublime, the next 4 lines are about the smallness of the sea and the gentleness of the sea. Not smallness, the smallest shell, but the gentleness of the sea. And then there's a clear then there's a turn, and that turn is called volta, which is Italian for turn. And then there's that significant development in the final 6 lines where and that cannot be announced more clearly than this "oh ye," exclamatives go, "Oh God, you over there, come and sit here and watch the sea." And so we've got the structure is enacting out the ideas. So we're looking at it and then allowing the imagination to sort of feed what we're looking at, and that's acted out in the structure. And then we look at methods. It's something I know that you're familiar with from GCSE English literature. And a lot of this is similar, where we think about the methods that the writer's using in order to express and explore those ideas, so that kind of you'll be familiar with a lot of the things that we look at, although there's always new terms and new ideas as well for A-level English literature. So I just flagged up a few here. It might be worth you, if you completed this task for, I think it's question 2 on the sheet, to see to what extent you picked out these similar things, or not. Maybe you these are what I've sort of chose to focus on, but there are other things. They're not the only things, of course. So I think the contrast, mighty swell and smallest shell, it's probably not a coincidence that they share a rhyme as well. We've got hyperbole, maybe you picked up on that, and the inevitable personification, gentle temper. eternal whisperings would suggest that these is turning the sea into something living, which I suppose it is anyway, but even more so. Repetition of OE. One thing that is noteworthy for Keats, it's worth noting, is that he does focus a lot on senses, and he uses a technique called synesthesia, which is where a mixing together. Shadowy sound is a brilliant example of synesthesia. A sound doesn't have a shadow, and shadows don't have a sound, but they do in this poem. And the shadowy sound is very evocative and very pictorial and very sensuous. It's a cloying melody. Cloying is something which we taste. It's something which is overly sweet, and he's using that to describe music. So anyway, that's a technique we would probably consider if we're looking at this poem. And we heard earlier from Evie about the critics being a key aspect, and one of the key distinguishing features. I know you would touch upon critics on English language and literature, but on English literature you focus on it in a little bit more detail, especially for 12th night, as I was saying, for coursework. And it's we're not going to go into this is a whole lesson here, so I'm just going to flag up the different ways in which Keats was responding, different ways in which readers responded to Keats over the last 200 years. When he was alive, he died when he was, I think, he was 26. He tragically died very young. His poems were pretty much panned by most reviewers. They didn't like him at all. And he said, as he knew he was dying, he said, what on his epitaph he would like, "Here lies one whose name was writ in water." So the idea that he just felt that he was just going to disappear from history, but no one would remember him as a poet, and that's it. So name, when you write your name in water, it sort of obviously immediately disappears, and that's because most of the critics at the time, the reviewers at the time, just dismissed him as known pejoratively as a part of the Cockney school, and so he wasn't middle class or aristocratic enough for most readers. And he was dismissed here as a fanciful, dreaming tea drinker who lacked any intelligence to analyze a single idea or imagination enough to form one original image. You can consider that looking at this poem. Do you think that this poem is a bit too fanciful? Do you think that the idea in this poem is a little bit straightforward? Do you think that the images that we read in this poem aren't very original? If you do, then you'll be agreeing with all those critics from 200 years ago. It was only after he died, really. He did have lots of friends, John Keats, who supported him and helped him and actually tried to build his literary reputation during and after his death, during his life and after he died. But it was only really in the Victorians, Tennyson, and subsequently the Pre-Raphaelites, who realised that Keats was an extraordinary poet of sensuous richness and vivid pictorial effects. So they would very much focus on the shadowy sounds and the cloying melody and the eternal whisperings, and those are the really sort of evocative aspects of the poem. More recently, critics have admired the way Keats radically engages not in an obvious way, but in a subtle and sort of thoughtful way, engages with class, with politics and economics. So more recent critics might focus on the uproar rude and on the last 6 lines. The lights have gone off. I think they're on a motion sensor thing. So Keats radically engages with class, politics and economics, so focusing on the uproar rude, and they're going back to quoting Evie now for possibly the 3rd time, the romantic pushback against industrialization. So that is a model of the approaches, or some of the approaches and some of the questions we ask, and some of the some of the approaches we take when we study a poem or any text really on the English literature A level. Now it's changed to purple now. That indicates that it's gone from green here to purple, and that means we're moving on now to English language and literature and modelling the approaches that we normally take on that course. This text, the Charlie Brooker text, is a text that is in the anthology, which is studied on the English language and literature course. But it's obviously much longer when you come to study it. It's a longer version. Where I've just selected 2 paragraphs from this article. You might be familiar with Charlie Brooker. He's worked in television. He created the Black Mirror TV series, which is now on Netflix. He's a fairly famous face, I suppose. In this article, is explaining why he has decided to stop writing a weekly opinion column for The Guardian. The extract focuses on Brooker's views on reader comments, which is when readers have a facility to write a response, an immediate response to the article that they've just read. So, like I say, this is a small extract, just a couple of paragraphs taken from a much longer article, obviously. I'm just going to read this one out now. Reader comments form part of the overall word storm, and it's true I'm not a huge fan of them, but that's chiefly because I'm an elderly man from the age of steam who clings irrationally to the outmoded belief that articles and letters pages should be kept separate like church and state. I guess conceptually, I still think I'm writing in a newspaper, even though the reality of what that means has changed beyond measure since I started doing it. So now I'm sitting grumpily in a spaceship with my arms folded, wearing a stovepipe hat. Ridiculous. These days, most newspaper sites are geared towards encouraging interaction with the minuscule fraction of readers who bother to interact back, which is a pity because I'm selfishly uninterested in conducting any kind of meaningful dialogue with humankind in general. I'd say Twitter's better for back and forth discussion anyway, if you could be asked with it. Yelling out of the window at passers-by is another option. It's a very different text from our sort of from the Keats sonnet. So we're now moving on to our second Zoom poll of the evening, and again it does link to a question which was on the task originally from the email. What are Brooker's views on reader comments? So you're going to have another poll now, exactly the same as the first one you did. So there's more than one correct answer, but you choose the one which you agree with the most. Okay, another sort of 15 seconds or so. It's quite evenly spread, this one. Five more seconds. I can just see there's a few more to go. Okay, I think we're ready. Thank you. Oh, look at that. It's very, very close. So it's quite exciting, isn't it, seeing this? So 3 answers taking the vast majority of a share. He's not a huge fan of them. In fact, that's a direct quotation from what he says. You can't argue against that one. He is not a huge fan of them. So absolutely. He has old-fashioned views and thinks if people wish to make a comment, they should write a letter to the newspaper instead. That's effectively also what he says as well. But at the same time as acknowledging that his views are old-fashioned, as it were. The one that just peeps into the winning position. He isn't bothered about what people have to say, and it's the wrong forum for this kind of interaction. And so, in many ways, that's the kind of, like we saw in the Keats sonnet, the kind of the structure. The paragraphs are obviously about different things, and the first paragraph focusing on is this old-fashioned views, and then thinking about, well, what is the right way for people to say these things. And he says perhaps Twitter, but but then the suggestion that shouting at passers-by is broadly the equivalent to Twitter anyway, so you might as well do that. So yeah, so there's a range of different ideas here, but yeah, that's where we are. So yeah, we'll finish that one. Thank you. So the same approach really. We read a text, we think about what it means, what the ideas are in that text, but perhaps more so on the English language and literature, we're a bit more specific. Obviously, we looked at the romantic context of John Keats. There's a little bit more systematic in many ways certainly for the kind of for the non-fiction, for the non-literary text, where we might consider genre, which is something Ethan mentioned earlier, the type of text that it is, the audience, who did Charlie Brooker have in mind when he wrote this, and to what extent has that affected the way it's been written, and that might be more than one type of audience, that is, and the purposes. What is the writer trying to achieve? And again, there will be more than one for that. So without further ado, we're moving on very swiftly to the third Zoom poll of the evening. What type of audience do you think this article is aimed at? So again, it's directly from one of the questions on the sheet that you may produce beforehand. So yeah, there we go. The answer which you feel is preferring. More of an even spread on this one. Give you another 15 seconds. Okay, yep. Readers of the Guardian app, just about won that one. Yeah, I suppose in order to answer this question, we need to know that it was written in for the Guardian, it's interesting because he's talking about the kind of reader comments, which is part of that sort of the technology and the way in which journalism has changed so much over the last 15, 20 years, or less than that, 10 years. Yeah, so the fact that there's the printed version of The Guardian, but there's also the Guardian app and so on, and the ways in which people can respond immediately to the text, to the article. Adults with an interest in language and social media, yeah, absolutely. If you're going to see that headline, and you're interested in these things, you're far more likely to read it. For the final two, it requires you to perhaps have some sense of the typical or average a reader of The Guardian, and whether or not the old distinctions between left wing and right wing sort of remain, but certainly, traditionally speaking, the readers of The Guardian are more likely to be left wing than right wing. So yeah, Twitter users as well. Yeah, people who are actively engaged in social media to hear and see and read about other perspectives on it. Yes, and fans of Charlie Brooker as well. So yeah, that's great. So then the next question we'd think about would be, to what extent have those different types of audiences, I've outlined 3 or 4, to what extent has that influenced the way in which Charlie Brooker wrote his article, knowing that there are people out there who are going to be reading it who might be Twitter users, knowing, in fact, that there are readers out there who will write a reader comment in an article about reader comments. And there's a sort of a knowing awareness of this kind of dialogue, this technological dialogue, which is taking place. And then, as always, we then move, after considering these sort of ideas and the context in the text, we then start to think about the language which is being used. And one of the things, certainly for this particular text, we wouldn't necessarily always ask this question, but how would you describe the overall tone of this extract? So onto our 4th and final poll of the evening. How would you describe the overall tone of this extract? Again, only one answer, but there's more than one possible answers. Much quicker on this one. Okay, another 10 seconds. Okay, ready? I think I'm finding these polls a little bit more exciting than I should. It's seeing it move and just right at the last minute, bitter one, bitterness wins. Yeah, in many ways, it's kind of all of these, isn't it? We've got, it's humorous, and you've picked up on the informal and chatty elements, and the bitterness, especially with this ridiculous of him sitting grumpily in a spaceship. But there are some reflective aspects as well, as he thinks and reflects on the situation. It's a kind of interesting and social and serious topic that he's writing about. And although it is informal, there are some formal elements. It's not the same level of formality as informality as a I don't know, a WhatsApp message between friends. So the next question then will be how language is being used to develop and suggest this tone or these tones. So we finish sharing. Yeah. So then that kinds of provides us with a funnel into thinking about the language. So some of the techniques that Brooker uses to make his argument more convincing and more entertaining, and also to develop this tone which we've been talking about. So if you've completed this test, you will see it's question 4 on the questions to consider, and I'm going to just pick out three sentences, sorry, from a short extract of the article, just to demonstrate the sort of things, the sort of language features that we consider on a language and literature course. Now, we talked earlier about, in the previous poll, we considered the level of informality. So that's established immediately with that expression, I guess, which is a very informal colloquial expression. So we're more likely to say that than write that, although in multimodal text, obviously that changes. But then immediately, the third word is this conceptually, which is an adverb, which is more formal, certainly more abstract, and suggesting that he's actually talking about some sophisticated ideas, but couched in this sort of informal expression. The sentence in black here is the rest of the sentence is a complex sentence. It's got a range of subordinate clauses, when we'll consider that, and that's a key aspect of looking at grammar and terms, as we heard at the beginning. This is a key part of the language and literature course. Fronted conjunction, a conjunction put at the beginning of a sentence. And that suggests, and that develops the idea. So we've got this slightly more abstract sort of quality in that first sentence. And then we've got the change or the development in the second sentence, where he's locating the I wonder if Alicia had her hand up. She's just she's moving a lamp. Then it moves to the figurative, where he's trying to kind of illustrate or make concrete in a figurative way the abstract idea of the first sentence. Oops, that's the wrong order. So we've got the humorous image, which I'm sure you would have picked up on, of him sitting grumpily in a spaceship, wearing a stovepipe hat. Then that's kind of structural contrast is suggested in both the grammar. We've got stovepipe hat and the spaceship. So we've got those two images, which are of course contrasting and juxtaposed in order to create humor. We might focus on the adverb of manner here, grumpily. So he's acknowledging that he's basically a grump. That's his shtick as well. I don't know if you've seen Charlie Brooker, but he does grumpy very well. And so he's acknowledging it here in that sort of, in a kind of meta way. And then, yeah, adverb of time. I think that's significant here, this now. This suggestion that this slightly more abstract consideration of how time is, of how newspapers have changed and what things are like now. So that second sentence is a significant development of that. And then, of course, we've got the minor sentence at the end as well. A minor sentence is a sentence about a verb. It's elliptical. It's a fragment, and it's largely for comic effect, isn't it? It's it's also an adjective. Anyway, so these are the sort of layers and the sort of terms and the frameworks which we use when I said earlier about going deep into the language. This sort of forensic sort of picking apart is what many students acknowledge as a difference really between language and literature, and it's a fascinating aspect of the course to look at how language is structured to create meaning in a really kind of focused way. Another thing we then might consider would be, as we heard from the three language and literature students, how reading, sort of writing as a reader, so something that, so reading texts to inspire you and to provide models for your own writing. So we may then sort of bounce into an opinion article on social media using this as a particular style model. Now, as I said earlier, this text is taught, is studied on the language and literature course. And so just going to pass over now to Amy, who's got a few things to say from when she studied this in a lesson.
Yeah, so this article was really interesting when we studied it, because I think with the language and literature course, when we look at the voices anthology, we mainly have discussions. So we kind of see kind of what each other thinks, and we also get like the opinion of our teacher. And as you saw there, that's kind of the layers of detail that we go into. So then we kind of take that analysis and kind of look at it wider, like a wider view of it. So look at the audience, the purpose, the form, and like the generic conventions. So despite this still being online, it still kind of had those typical newspaper conventions in kind of the way it was reflected in the headline. And I think, yeah, mainly the discussions that we have allows us to really kind of delve deeply into the article and really think about what the author was trying to portray. So as much as it is informal and kind of has colloquial, kind of hyperbolic elements, it also is very formal in kind of the words it used, and metaphors are quite complex. And then we kind of looked at that and thought, well, why might Charlie Brooker have done this? Is it for the audience? Is it kind of as a combat to these negative comments he might be getting, or is it more kind of he's reflecting his own personal view, or is he reflecting the audience's personal view? Kind of that this is the Guardian newspaper, and it might be more right-wing, highly educated people compared to kind of someone who maybe didn't go to university, so he's trying to maybe possibly have a satirical poke at other classes, and that could maybe be represented in like his job. And we looked at how like he's a wider influence in his broadcasting, and then from this we would compare it to an unseen text. So in the exam we would have this article, and then we would have to compare it to something else and kind of look at the links, like I said, with the author and how maybe his purpose links or if they differ. So yeah, I think definitely if you want to go away and read this article, I would highly recommend it. Makes for an interesting read.
Yeah, it's still it's available. It's if you just search for it, it's still online on the Guardian website, open access. So yeah, if you want to read the rest of the article, yes, definitely, it's all there, ready and available for you. As I said earlier at the very beginning, if any of you have any questions that you'd like to cover, or answer, not cover, if you'd like me to answer, or the students to answer, then by all means do so. Then over the next few minutes, if I come through, I've got something. So there's the Q&A sort of tab on there for you to ask questions, and Denise is passing them over to me. There's a question here about plus classes. Are they open to all students or just students recommended by a teacher? Largely it's students recommended by a teacher. To be honest, it depends on circumstance. It depends on and it does change depending on staffing and so on. But plus classes, the vast majority of the time, are students who are identified by the teacher, always part of a conversation with the student about whether or not a plus class is a sensible level, sensible support, and will help sort of iron out any kind of misunderstandings or misconceptions, or indeed push towards the highest grades as well. So that's generally what happens, although it's this year there's been a few disruptions to that because of circumstances, but yeah, so plus classes largely it's recommended by the teacher. So we've got a few more coming, just bear with me. Okay, so we have a question here. Would you recommend reread the text for both courses to decide between the two courses? I'm going to pass that over to a student. Well, Amy, you talked about that earlier, didn't you, Amy?
Yeah, so I actually found that really useful to do, especially if you're undecided. I was at first actually leaning more toward the literature side, and then I went to the library. Like I said, I got out both books, or all the books, and and I kind of read through them, and as I was reading through them I kind of thought, oh, could I see myself, you know, writing an essay on this? So I definitely think it's a really good thing to do. Even you can start now, because I think I had a lot of reading to do over that 6 weeks. So yeah, I kind of read through Gatsby Othello, and then I also looked at the Reigate College website, and I kind of saw under English language and literature and English literature kind of what the format of those exams would be like in looking at the books. So with Gatsby and Othello, you have to compare them, and I kind of started to think of my own links between them. And then with the literature, I also kind of read through that. I also watched The Handmaid's Tale to kind of make it a bit easier for myself as well.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Amy. That is a very diligent, very kind of committed preparation for the course. Just open to any of your three remaining students, did you go about it in a different way? Was your heart set and you read the text as and when? Or Ethan, how did you go about that?
Well, I didn't actually take that approach myself. Looking back, probably a good idea, but for me it was I don't know, I didn't actually do that much research into the text, because for me I kind of wanted it to be a surprise. And so, you know, we got given the text and you get plenty of time to read it in your own time, and there is deadlines, and you know, you're just left to you know, read it and work on it and study it really to your own schedule at home. So yeah, that's what I did, and it worked out pretty well.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks, Ethan. Another question here is on homework. Basically, what sort of homework is set, and for how frequently, and so on. So, Evie, would you like to answer that?
Yeah, so the types of homework we get vary a lot. So there's just like reading tasks and stuff like that, and perhaps writing practice paragraphs once you've got more into the text and you actually have things to write about when you start studying them. We've also been doing some homework on there's a website called Massalit, which uploads lectures and things, so we listen to a lecture and make notes on that. So it's yeah, there's a big range of different types of homework tasks we get. Yeah,
we the expectation is you're doing sort of 3, 4, 5 hours a week outside of lessons for the subject. So it's a lot of reading involved, but also preparation for lessons, and also reading around and context, and as we saw, for example, with Massalit, which is a great resource which we use in the literature course. So other questions. Oh, it's a good one. This is one for Langlitters. How can non-fiction writing be creative writing? Any volunteers to answer that one? Ethan?
Yeah, actually, for me personally, my non-fiction was definitely my favorite out of the two, because obviously you're writing about something that you've personally experienced, or not necessarily. Actually, you can write about others, but you're recommended to write about yourself. And so I talked about my first experience, my first impression of going to Kathmandu, the capital city of Nepal, on a trip I went to there, which is quite extreme, but I just used like my memories as fuel to just feed the fire of creative thought and creative writing. And so it turned out to be actually my better piece of coursework. So yeah.
And you found it as equally a creative act as for fiction?
Yes, absolutely, because it's just all about how you convert your what's in your mind to the piece of paper. So yeah, it's all the same pretty much.
We can see that with just the Charlie Brooker article. You know, the way in which he uses the metaphor and the kind of in a fairly complex and developed way to express his ideas is it's the same thing that John Keats is doing. Really, it's the same approach, the same method. Okay, yeah, we have to speed up. How many students per class? Between 15 and 20 is the average. That's a quick one to answer. To the students, what is your favourite text that you, or favourite topic that you study? So, Alicia, what's your favourite thing that you've studied?
We are just finishing studying translations right now, which is the other play that we do. So we do Othello and translations. And that's probably been my favorite, which was quite surprising for me because I'd never even like heard of it before. But it's really interesting because it has a lot of contextual details. It's got a lot of biblical context in it, a lot of references to classics and Irish history. And so I feel like it's one where the more context you know, the more that you can link the language in it. So it's quite like when you really get something in it, it's quite exciting. You can get quite passionate about it. So yeah, that's my favorite.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for that. I've got some practical questions here. What books, plays, poems do we study? That all that information is on the website. So it might be worth looking at that. But shall I quickly go through it now? On the literature course, you study and compare The Handmaid's Tale with Frankenstein. You study Twelfth Night. You study a collection of modern poetry, and you also compare that with unseen poetry. You look at coursework text, which at the minute is Oscar Wilde, Dorian Gray, and Importance of Being Earnest, but that's under review at the minute. We look at Streetcar Named Desire and John Donne as well as the literature text, rattling through it. On the language and literature course, you compare Gatsby and Othello. We look at the translations and the Voices anthology and the translations, which are the modern drama in the second year. And also comparing with unseen non-fiction texts, and also and a range of unseen texts as well, preparing for that, as well as the coursework, which you're aware is a very creative writing aspect. Will students be provided with the reading material, or do students have to buy it? You will be provided with the text, with the set text, and you'll be sort of lent them like a library lends them out, and then you give them back after 2 years, basically. How long do you spend on each book? Okay. Well, I'll answer that one. About a term, isn't it? About a term on each text, but you do two, one alongside the other. So, for example, you might look at Gatsby, and also for 2 lessons a week, and then Othello for 2 lessons a week, and then so you study them both alongside one another. So approximately it varies, and obviously we return to the text frequently once we finish them in preparation for end of year exams, key assessments, mock exams, and of course the final exams. So it's a kind of churn, really. We kind of keep going back to these texts as well. But in terms of teaching them for the first time, it normally takes about a term. So any other questions? Or are we finishing? Because this
I want to know how many hours of how many lessons they get.
So the how many hours as the final question? So it'll be sort of it's 4 lessons a week. Normally it's 1 hour and 5 minutes per lesson. But because of the current kind of bubbles and lockdown and so on, it's reduced to 1 hour. But normally it would be 1 hour and 5 minutes per lesson, and it'd be 4 lessons a week, and that's the same for pretty much all subjects as well. So one final one.
How many marks?
Okay, how many marks are they marked out of? It doesn't matter is the short answer to that, because the exam board pick a number just to make it make the kind of assessment objectives weight equally across the different questions and across the whole course and so on. For example, the novels comparison on English literature is marked out of 40, but that doesn't mean that you have to make 40 points or anything like that. So it's between 20 and 40 is what they're marked out of. But what the total is marked out of merely reflects the weight of the different weightings of the different texts. So some texts are worth slightly more as a percentage towards the grade than other texts. So I think that is it. So thank you for taking part in the polls. That was great fun. I hope that explained to you and clarified the differences between English literature and English language and literature, and you have a clearer sense of what's involved on an English A level. And I'd like to thank the other panelists for their contributions. I don't know if you want to perhaps unmic yourselves and just say thank you and goodbye.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank
Brilliant.
you.
Okay. Thank you, everyone, and I look forward to seeing you at some point in the future. Okay. Thank you.